right. Well, Dr. Makhaya Malema, welcome to Accessible.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're very excited. So you are actually I think, our first international guest.
That's
So,
true, yeah.
Okay.
We're very excited to have you. So I don't want to steal all your thunder. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what are you doing in the U.S.?
This is always an awkward thing for me. I always don't know how to introduce myself. So my name is Makhaya Johannes, is my second name. Malema, born and raised in Polokwane, Limpopo province. Then currently I'm working and located in Cape Town, South Africa.
Uh-huh.
Do I need to say my age?
No, you don't.
Okay.
We will make you reveal.
We'll just describe you as young and handsome. A young and handsome podcast guest here.
So I'm in academics. My academic rank is senior lecturer, and I also do research. So I teach classes for second years and third years, and also a postgrad master's course, a research course, and the honors level.
Uh-huh.
I also supervise students' thesis at master's level, honors level, and at doctoral level.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. So you're a little bit busy, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at my inbox right now on my email, it's crazy. Yeah. So
What are some of the classes that you teach?
So my field is recreation and leisure studies. So the class that I teach at second year, it's called recreational theory of recreation. I can't remember the exact wording. Recreation theory. And
Okay.
then at third year, I teach recreation theory as well, but at more community set up, community recreation, and also it's got an internship component. So there's a theory and a practical component. I think so in the practical component, we kind of set up our students to go work in the communities, to learn about implementing programs in the communities, recreational programs, more inclusive social recreation and programs. And in the theory part of things, we kind of teach them how to set up a program. What are some of the stuff that you need to keep an eye out on? Like, say, for example, the needs assessment, community profile, and so forth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then at honors level, I teach research project module, and I also teach the one module, it's called the sociology of sport.
Oh,
Okay.
nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I always find it interesting because I think you use the word recreation. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that refers to something like we would use a different word in the U.S. Can you tell us what do you mean? Like, what is recreation when you're talking about it?
So recreation in the context that, well, I think most people in South Africa would refer to any structured activities that takes place at a particular location where it's scheduled. People go in and participate in different activities. This could be physical activity, exercise, and leisure programs. But then reason why it's structured is because maybe, like, say, for example, at a YMCA, right? They've got different programs. And if, say, for example, they schedule a class, a Zumba class, for example, and you miss that particular slot, then you have to wait for another time when it's scheduled. So it just basically refers to that. But then sometimes it could be unstructured in a sense that maybe a group of friends could potentially set up a time and just go and play a particular activity. So any activity that is not forced on you, but it's structured in a sense that you set up a location and a time for it, that basically, in a nutshell, what recreation would mean.
Yeah. So I think largely we would call that PE or physical education.
Right.
Yeah, but I also think like I'm thinking of like going to a community center and then engaging in activities, right?
Yeah.
Like anything. Could it be a hobby even? Anything related to book clubs or cooking classes, Zumba, physical fitness?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Without down that alley.
So the thing that I think is really cool is somehow you have gotten into how do we include people with disabilities in these leisure and recreation activities?
Yeah.
How did that come about that you became interested in including people with disabilities in those activities?
Yeah. So when I did my master's, right, my research topic was the leisure needs and constraints for deaf young adults. And what got me intrigued is when I was speaking to my advisor at the time, Dr. Tron Welbach. So when we spoke about just kind of conceptualizing the study, it kind of included me immersing myself in the deaf community. So I went to like one of the community meetings, and when I was there, I realized that these people are actually not excluding themselves. I'm talking about the deaf community. They're not excluding themselves. They want to be part of the community, but then there's just no inclusivity in terms of their level of needs, support, and stuff. So, and this came as a reflection for me post the community meeting where the deaf people, part of the representative, were part of the meeting. But in that meeting, there was no interpreter for them. But the information is shared in one platform or in like spoken language.
Right.
But they need access to that information. And by them not getting someone to interpret for them, it's basically, I don't know what's the correct term, being it's not segregated, right?
Or left out,
Excluded, yeah. So then I got to think about the leisure part of things because that's my profession. And I think about leisure in the context that whenever I have free time, what could I potentially go and do? And because already of the experience of being exposed to that meeting, and I just pondered and wondered how much more could it be in their own free time where they need to go and, you know, just be in a space where they can express themselves and just kind of recreate or, you know, do some physical activity. And I started wondering, and me and my supervisor at the time, about like what sort of needs do they have with regards to expressing themselves, being at leisure, so to speak. And that's how kind of like the interest kind of sparked for me about disability communities and my profession.
Yeah.
You bring up some great points because I think often we think of access around things like healthcare, right? Or so like we need sign language interpreters if you're going to the doctor or if you're going to school, like special education, right, in schools. But we don't often think about just things happening in the community.
Right.
And these community services, community centers. We have a great partnership here with the Missouri Alliance of YMCAs. And there's these epicenters for leisure, recreation, physical activity, and they want people to come. They want the whole community to come. That they're not really maybe fully equipped in considering all the needs of people with disabilities and how they could be supported to like, use their services. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds silly in a sense that, you know, like say for example, if I'm in commercial recreation, which is mostly consumable leisure, right? So I come up with a concept of people can come and do some sort of activities in my space, right? And I have different programs that I've lined up. The first thing that I'm thinking about is, okay, this is profit generated, right? And the typical audience would be that everyone should be welcome to come in because, I mean, it's a private space, right? But what I've learned so far, in as far as my research and encounters, is that most of these type of settings, even in public spaces, they don't account to different people and what their needs are. And it's not just basic like health, like you said, and education, but then it's all around. It often becomes neglected space and an afterthought, so to speak, where people only think about, oh, maybe we should have put up a ramp, instead of, hey, before we actually get this thing started, how about we also have a ramp? Because, we are a diverse population.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's very maybe reactive, and that's why it feels like an afterthought. It's like, well, now we have a community member who uses a wheelchair and they want to access this event or this space. So then, that comes about when the need is there. And I think that's one of the things we've been working on with YMCAs here, is talking about having someone from that those communities on like your advisory board, right? And so that they're giving that input and that putting that into the design of a program or a physical space from the start.
Yeah. I think, I don't know. I don't remember the last time I was involved in any community project or something like that. But you hardly see, and I think that's part of the reason why I did my doctorate under leadership, because you don't often see people with disabilities in these boards. Sometimes you find that there's what I'm going to use this term, and please correct me, able-bodied people advancing and advocating for people with disability, but not including them in the same space. Like, how, I'm just thinking to myself now, how do you advocate for me without me in the process? And hence, I think the nothing about us without us concept originated.
Right.
And I find this to be something that I think would be, in a way, helpful toward mitigating the exclusions if more people with disabilities are included in these plannings, in these conversations about what needs to be implemented and so forth. But I mean, at least someone is talking about this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So from your perspective, why is it important to include people with disabilities in these activities and in these spaces?
Again, the nothing about us without us. I think more like a consultative process, in a sense that if service providers wants to come and implement a program, right, they don't know what my specific needs are. As in, and I'm going to use this term able-bodied versus people with disability. Like, say, for example, there's this notion or assumption that because I'm able-bodied, then I'm able to get access to A, B, and C. But then for someone with a disability, if you don't know what their needs are, how then can you support them to be on equal ground as mainstream population? I don't know if I'm making sense. So reason why it's important to include them is so that they're not excluded in the decision making, in the programs that are implemented, in basic things like your housing, education, and health. So I think from that concept, it's very important to make sure that they're part and parcel of any decision that affects their life. And even the Constitution says it outrightly: no one can be excluded because of race, color, and disability.
Yeah, I think you bring up another really good point. Thinking in our rec spaces, right, in our community spaces, that visibility of people with disabilities is so important, right? Because I think if we're only thinking of accessibility or inclusion in those fields, we've already talked about health, school, right? That we're not thinking about how are people gaining access to their community and fully participating, and just being seen and being a part of their community. And so thinking about how we can talk about including people with disabilities in sports and recreation and leisure activities is very important, you know. And it's also, they have the right to pursue their good life. I'm thinking of like our whole with Shelley, Dr. Shelley Reynolds, which I'm sure you've spent some time with her since you've been, or are you spending time with her soon? Since you've been here. Okay. So you're going to hear all about The Good Life, which is a group here, the Charting the Life course Nexus, and they talk about the good life a lot, and that's what that reminds me of, right? It's being able to pursue your interests, not just your health, your education, but what do I love to do?
Yeah.
Play sport, do art, things like that.
And I just thought of something now, and I don't know if it's the same in the US, but like a typical thing, like going to see a game in a stadium, right? That's a public space. So what happens in most cases, like people that are using wheelchairs, they don't have the same setup or seat allocation in stadiums compared to the rest of the people that attend an event or a game or something.
Yeah.
I've seen in most of the matches that I've attended in South Africa where maybe someone in a wheelchair will be taken into like a more flat surface but not part of the spectators. Kind of like it seems like they're being inclusive, but then if there was really careful planning in the beginning, then they would have made seat allocation to cater for people with disabilities in the same levels, in the same areas, rather than just, moving them in a whole different category.
Right.
Either being ahead of other people without, I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, like it's like there but separate, right?
Yeah,
it's like you've made a space, but it's separate still from everyone else.
Yeah.
Right? So is it really inclusive, I guess, is what you're kind of posing, and I agree with you.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's a common thing with all the stadiums, or maybe it's just the ones that I've noted in the games that I attended. But I just find it fascinating how there's been policies that are being developed to try and accommodate people with disabilities, but I feel like there's practical things that are being left out in those policies, guidelines and frameworks. And hopefully with everyone that's involved or talking about disability community and advocating for them and being part of the movement to try and bring about change, hopefully the voices that we speak could actually hit home to the implementing agents. Hopefully someday we'll live to see the real inclusion.
Yeah.
So you talked about your research on when you were doing your master's. What does your research look like now? You mentioned leadership. What kinds of work are you doing now?
Okay, so in my master's, I focused on leisure needs and constraints. And when I moved to Cape Town, I realized that there's actually more in as far as the communities that I've interacted with. There's more people with physical disability, but with that, there's actually few people that are seen as role models, and role models in a sense that they are active in the communities, being part of the conversations or sitting around the table and so forth. And when I engaged with what we call the Association for Persons with Disabilities, APD in short, and I got to, kind of learn and be part of the conversations, do some home visits with the social workers to see where these people are staying in, the interactions that they have in the communities and so forth. And one of the biggest take home for me was that there wasn't really much confidence when it comes to leading certain conversations. And again, because my profession is in leisure and recreation, I immediately thought about, hey, if there's no one leading basic conversations, then what about the stuff that you have control over? And that's where the concept of leadership development, linking it with leisure education, which mainly centers around three main things, or maybe it's four. I think four. Okay. So it's education about leisure, education through leisure, education about, I think. I'll need to confirm that. But there's about four elements, right? And with that, it's not only focusing entirely on leisure, but then it's also focusing on how to access leisure, what are the skills that you require, information, resources, and so forth. And because all these people are in communities, they might necessarily not know where the information is or how to access A, B, and C, mainly because they are not part and parcel of the conversations. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really interesting when we did the data collection to actually see that there is desire for leadership development, but then there was just something missing. Mm-hmm. As I'm speaking to you right now, there's a couple of people that participated in my studies that have now taken on active roles in their communities. They are also now involved in NGOs where they try to encourage other people living with disabilities, to be more active, in a sense that they don't want them staying up in their homes, being isolated, but then they want them to be part of a network and a community where, they can sort of encourage and be there for each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that in a way kind of closes up the gap in between mainstream society and the community, disability community. Mm-hmm. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Definitely.
I'm curious. So you're talking about including people with disabilities in leisure and recreation activities, but in South Africa, maybe it's not even possible to make a blanket statement about South Africa, but what are some of the responses to disability, or how do people think about disability? Is it something that has to be cured, or is it just something that's accepted? And what are the overall sort of perceptions
really
of disability?
That's really interesting. So, okay, currently we have 12 official languages, and with that, there's different cultural groups, right? So the way the different cultures, I suppose, have a different response into how they perceive disability. So you'd find that I think now it's better in a sense that, young people are more aware of things. So even, say, for example, someone with a disability, they wouldn't necessarily want to be isolated, but then they want to be out there, try to stand out by themselves. But I think historically you'd find that most cultural groups, they pity someone with a disability. They rather see them being hidden, in a sense, because they don't want members of the society knowing that there's a person with disability in their families. And there's a decent amount of literature that's published on this topic, where the historical approach of disability, it's kind of mapped out, so to speak, where there isn't a lot of acceptance for people with disability. But you start seeing a difference in approach when there's a family member with a disability, in how people now start wanting to talk about disability. Mm-hmm. But in general, I think it still happens. I'm just not really much aware of those conversations. But I do know for a fact that the different the cultural group perceive disability different. And it also depends, again, on the nature of disability. Like if it's someone with IDD, for example, if it's someone with a physical disability, the perception is also different. Someone that's autistic, for example, will be perceived different to a person with physical disability. So it's kind of like a gray area, But generally, I feel like most people in South Africa, I almost want to say they look down on other disabilities, or they kind of scale them depending on which type of disability it is.
You had mentioned that slogan, "Nothing about us without us," which it really came out of the disability civil rights movement here in the United States. And just wondering if you've seen a similar movement in South Africa on civil rights for people with disabilities, and is that a slogan that is also said there?
Yeah. I think there's been a more global approach on that concept.
Yeah.
So we also have this, I don't know if it's a advocacy movement or a statement about relating with other people. It's called Ubuntu. So it kind of like has the same approach as Nothing About Us Without Us, in a sense that it advocates for people first. So in the way that you want to be treated, you should treat someone else equally.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to be treated less because of how they look or how they speak or whatever the case may be. So I think there's been a lot of inspiration from that slogan and how people kind of try to advance their society and community and kind of breaking down the stereotypes and the negative associations or connotations that are labeled against people with disability or people that are just different. So there has been a lot of inspiration. And earlier on I spoke about APD, Association for Persons with Disabilities. They also have similar sort of mandate to try and raise more awareness, to try and bridge the gap between the disability communities and people without disabilities. So there's definitely been a lot of influence in a sense of American context into the African context. And I can speak about this South African context because I've read up most of the research about disability, which oftentimes, majority of the time, would have the same statement, Nothing About Us Without Us.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some influence, a lot of influence actually. Yeah.
I like how you referred to it as a global movement though. So, and just seeing kind of that pop up everywhere.
And I think also the different countries subscribe to, I don't know if it's, I can't get the word right. Like say for example, the United Nations rights or conventions. What's the wording? I forgot. Yeah.
Oh, like human rights.
Convention. Yeah, the conventions. Yeah, the convention rights for people with disabilities. I think it's under the UN, if I'm not mistaken. Where I think South Africa is affiliated to such organizations. So that they don't exclude themselves from global conversations that are affecting people within their own context. Obviously, there'll be different geographical spaces and whatever the case may be, but I think a whole lot of the international influence is being adopted within our own context, within the same conversations.
So in the last week, you've learned a lot about programs here, but just about the system for supporting people with disabilities in the U.S. Are there any things that stick out to you as either being, like, oh, this is really interesting, or good, and I like this about what's happening in the U.S. and vice versa? Are there things that you think, maybe we do this a little better in South Africa?
I think so far my experience in reflection has been quite positive, and I feel like if there was a way for me to adopt all the programs that I've learned about, that would be really awesome. But I think It's going to require a lot of manpower and resources that are being invested to make sure that we almost try to be in the same space as IHD. And I think I mentioned this to you, George, a couple of times about the kind of impact that you guys are doing, particularly at IHD and in the communities and the partners that you guys have. And I think what kind of stands out for me at the moment, it's the whole network around ITD, where pretty much all counties and all, I think the entire states, it's, putting its resources and investment on advancing people with disability. And I hopefully wish that we can get it right in South African context as well. There's offices that are dedicated to disability community, but I feel like there's more that can be done. Like, say, for example, the meeting that we went to in Jefferson City, I've never seen that happening. Like, in all spaces, maybe for, political spaces and stuff like that, but I've never seen such a network coming together for one purpose, trying to advance a particular topic.
Yeah.
And I really hope that, all scholars back in South Africa can unite and sort of champion this topic on disability in all fronts, whether being health or whatever the case may be. And I think that's my general take home. Just having not even a support structure, a network where people can share ideas, to make sure that we at least get one thing right. If it's multiple of them, then great. But at least we need to, I feel like we need to unite instead of working in silos. And so far what I've seen and learned from IHD, it's exactly that. People are willing to come together to advance and champion people with disabilities.
Okay.
Yeah. You mentioned some really great things, and I think to know that I think the journey is long and that there's always growth, and we are constantly, even though we have great partners and there's lots of exciting things happening around the state, we're also talking about breaking down silos all the time, right? So the you're never quite at the destination, right? Like we're always trying to advance, right, for the betterment of everybody, right? So it's cool to hear your reflections. What was the meeting that you guys went to in Jeff City, so that the listeners know what you're referring to?
It was a meeting for the Missouri Association for County Developmental Disability Services Boards. So MACDDS.
The county boards, yeah.
Right. The
Oh, we don't expect you to have learned all the acronyms in your short time here.
Like, literally, you guys have a code for everything.
Is that not something that you guys have in Cape Town? Do you not have a lot of acronyms?
Well, we don't use them quite a lot.
Okay, we use ours more. Is that the takeaway? Okay. Yeah. We created a whole language.
All good programs start with a good acronym.
Yeah. I mean, there's MACDDS, there's you said, we said, something said, some what?
That's going to be the biggest takeaway. We need more acronyms, or less. Honestly, maybe we should be less acronyms.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So, if anyone wants to learn more about your research and your work, where can they find it? Where can they go to learn more about you?
I think I've got most of my research on ResearchGate.
Okay.
So it's Makhaya, Malema, or Malema Makhaya, or something like that.
All right, we'll find out and put it in the notes, the show notes.
I don't really post a lot of research related stuff on my LinkedIn and X account, because I don't know. I feel like particularly on my X account, it's more my personal space. But on LinkedIn, I try to share as much opportunities as possible. So just Makhaya Malema, I think it's quite easy to find. I hope.
Yeah. All right, we'll link to it in our show notes.
Yeah. But I think I just thought about this now, and I think when I spoke about more people uniting in the context of advancing certain topics about disability. And I'm not saying there isn't people that are doing it, but I feel like there's more people that can actually join on the conversation and advance it. And what made this possible, it's my advisors during all my degrees. And since I met up with them, I think they've been really supportive, and they've also published quite a lot in these topics as well. For example, Professor Lisa Wagner, Professor Mariang. Recently, we just published a paper in the one of the open access, I think it's called the Journal for Infrastructure Development and stuff like that. So there's definitely a whole lot of people that are talking about this. My wish, and I hope I can get it done before the end of my career, is to try and sort of unite everyone that's doing research on this, at least within the South African context, just to start up this link and network that you guys have, and kind of trying to work as a partnership or in a collaborative effort, rather than just, even if it's just one research project, or even if it's just one community or whatever the case may be, but at least having a team of people working towards one topic. I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Then I can retire.
Small goals.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Makhaya.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.